Hello and welcome you crazy people to Tabletop Oddity. My name is Jay and today I'm just going to be going through 5 basic terrain tips. Now I did this for the hobby in general, which was, it wasn't necessarily painting, but it was just sort of including everything. I did a couple of terrain related ones on there, but I thought we'd do some 5 specific terrain just tips that if you're interested in like making some terrain, then you know these are 5 tips for you. So what I want to talk about is you want cheap materials. This is tip number 1, is don't make anything out of anything that's ridiculously expensive, at least not first at the start. You should take your time, try and get the understanding of what we're doing as a whole, and then use more expensive stuff. Specifically, use some cheap brushes. So I've got like a little cheap set of Revel brushes. Obviously these aren't opened, but you know, I don't have every set of brushes that I bought and used to hand. And then I got these brushes from like Wilkinson's. I bought like a big pack for like £3 maybe, and they're just very useful. Like, don't use your miniature brushes basically to paint your terrain, because it'll be very expensive. And the same goes for like, don't use your brushes, don't use your miniature paints, and we'll get onto a little bit that in a second. But cheap materials can be stuff like stuff you get for free. Like I made some rock spires out of some polystyrene sheets, which, well, not sheets but packaging, stuff like that. You can make stuff with tin foil, just stuff that you get not for free but like really cheap. There's a video that I made where I made like a rocky outcrop, which was literally just stones that I found in a driveway. So you can use cheap materials and cheap equipment for terrain, because it's not like, it doesn't have to be perfect. And that's tip number 2, is don't worry about imperfections. Yes, like try and correct them, but don't stress about it. These aren't your finely detailed miniatures that you're going to spend ages painting and not decorating, that sounds weird, but painting and designing and that kind of thing. You're literally, you just want a decent looking table. Obviously if you're a perfectionist and you want that kind of stuff, do like worry about your imperfections, but just get cracking on there. Just start making stuff, get some cheap materials, start making stuff, and don't worry about the imperfections. Except, do worry about the imperfections when you get the chance. So later on in your process, like if you're making a hill and you've messed up painting the ground, but you're going to cover it in flock or static grass or grass tufts or something, then try and put those in the areas where you made a mistake to cover it up. The beauty of terrain is that a lot of the things that you mess up with can be covered up. And if you mess up on a grand scale, does it really matter if you've used cheap stuff? Yeah, it matters if you've spent you got expensive resin, you know, really thick cuts of extruded polystyrene or something, and they're very expensive. But most of the time, you can just use your cheap stuff, not worry about messing up. And like if you look through like my terrain tutorials, almost everything in there has been reasonably cheap, because that's sort of my goal when I'm doing terrain, is cheap looking, decent. Not cheap looking, that's not true. It's cheap, good looking terrain, and I think it's sort of achievable. And so don't worry about imperfections, you can sort of cover them up. Number 3, my 3rd tip, I said don't use your miniature paints. That's true. What kind of paints can you use instead? Well, you can use artist acrylic paints, but even those pound for pound, like for quantity, are slightly more expensive than house paints. House paints are the best kind of paints, but not house paints in the sense of you know, big giant tins. They're very expensive. What you sort of want are like tester pots, maybe about the size of this, and we'll get onto what this is in a minute. But Wilkinson's in the UK do some. A lot of decorating stores, like even Dulux, they do some. You just want cheap tester pots, and they'll do you for a lot of terrain. Like, it's surprising how far the paint will go. But tip number 3 isn't just not use your miniature paints. As I said, you've got your artist acrylics and stuff like that. It's to colour match. So in the miniature world, you know, you might see some tutorials and you might like somebody might do a rock and they might be like, use Monfine Brown, because I know I think I might have said that in my latest hill video. And you're like, well, I'm not going to actually pay for like a little tub of Monfine Brown or whatever it is, because like they're £3. Do you know what I mean? For something like that, and that's not going to go very far. Of course, that isn't going to go very far. You would be correct. So what you can do is a lot of decorating stores will allow you to colour match your paints. So this in the UK is what I got from B&Q. As I said, it's not just B&Q, a lot of decorating stores do it. And this is, you can do any colour. The beauty of the colour match is that you can do any colour. And what I do is I took, for example, this Vallejo model coloured dark sand. I wanted it for my hills. I put some on my finger, put some on some white paper, but you need to make sure that you cover it. Like, you don't want it to be a thin layer, because the white itself will tint the colour a little bit, and you want it to be the right thing, like darkness gradient basically. So this was Vallejo dark sand. It's not going to pick up brilliantly, but trust me, this is the lid, and you can see, you can at least see that they are very close, if not the same, and that's all I really need. I'm not doing models, I don't need it to be exactly consistent a lot of the time. I'm going to dry brush over it, so you can see that that is a pretty damn close mix. And what I've done is I'm going to put the lid on because I don't want to spill paint all over myself. Not in my work shirt, that would be bad. Probably just wear it anyway. I've got some sticky labels and I've written on what it is in some really high quality handwriting, as I'm sure we can all agree, just the best. But now I can use that in time, and then if I ever run out, I can always buy another tub of this and buy that. I didn't talk about the cost. There is quite a lot. I forgot how much is in this, but it's quite a lot. I'm trying to work out if I can see the milliliters. I think it might be 250. £4, £2 or £3, and you can obviously tell the quantity in there is going to be drastically different. It's not as good quality. They're for different things. This is for your miniatures. This is for terrain and stuff like that. So, you know, they're not the exact same kind of thing. Yeah, I'm really happy with it. The colour matching, I won't look back. It's just so easy to get specific shades. Like I've done dark sand. I've done, I want to say khaki. What is it? There's something desert. I can't remember. There's a colour that I've done from GW that I really like. So yeah, if you can do that, keep that in mind. You can follow tutorials online basically very accurately by colour matching, even if they use expensive paint. I love it and I probably won't look back. Speaking of tutorials, the way that I try and figure out my terrain is, or like what I'm going to build, I don't just, sometimes I create an idea from scratch and I'm like, oh, I can probably do that, and then I'll do some tests, fair enough. But a lot of the time I'm just researching either YouTube videos or blog posts or all that kind of stuff. And don't be afraid to combine different techniques from different YouTubers or different tutorials. Like, it's not a bad thing to be like, well, I like that, but I don't like this. So what I'm going to do is this and that. Like in my hill video, the one that I've just released, the first person I ever saw was Rubbish In, Rubbish Out. And he did it, and yep, I liked them, but it was on a massive table. I was like, nah. And as I was working up to do mine, I saw Wylock do his. And on his, instead of it being like a hill that like sloped in at the top, he does them like straight, and it like overhangs, and it looks great. It looks amazing. Don't get me wrong. But I was like, I want it to look more like a classic wargaming hill, so I sort of toned it back a little bit for my taste, and then released a video and stuff like that. So don't be afraid to combine different ideas that you've seen elsewhere. It's more than fine to borrow ideas and to mix different sources together. That is completely fine. And the last bit of advice, I'm sorry if you can hear the fan. It's so hot in the UK right now that I would like be physically melting if I didn't have the fan on. So I do apologise if you can hear that. My last little tip is simply a material. And it's a very cheap material, but it can be a cheap material if you get the right stuff. It's filler, which in the UK is like wall filler, or in the US I believe it's called spackle or wall compound or wall spackle or something like that. And it's just like a white, it's a thick paste that hardens up. And you can do so much with filler. I'm going to call it filler instead of spackle. You can do so much with it. You can literally design the ground. If you can texture it with your finger and design your ground, you don't need sand. You can add texture to buildings. You can solidify rocks. I just find that it does so much, and almost like not every product that I use, not every video or every tutorial does use it, but it's very like you can, in the UK you can get a tub for like £1. So probably a similar kind of thing in the US for $1, and it's worth having because there's no reason not to. It's not a very expensive material. Like, it's not saying go out and buy big thick sheets of extruded polystyrene. It's literally like £1 and you can do the ground. And like, you can do the ground and then you don't need PVA and sand for the base. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can say you can't really use it as an adhesive, but it sort of semi can, I guess. But it's just so versatile and so useful and so cheap that I just highly recommend it for everything. Not for everything. I don't put it on your miniatures. That would be crazy. But it's really good for terrain. So, like, I mean, there are a little bit varied tips there. There's nothing really like, there's no cohesion amongst those tips. But just to go through them again, use cheap materials. And I don't just mean filler. I mean, you know, don't be afraid to, like, oh, you've got a can, decorate something around it and make a silo. You've got some free polystyrene, cut it up with a sharp knife and make some rocks. You've got some actual stones, make some rocks. Like, whatever, you know, get some cheap brushes. Always handy to have. You don't need like very expensive PVA unless you're a super high quality builder. So just cheap materials for decent looking stuff and you're set. Don't worry about imperfections. You can sort of cover them up in a lot of different ways, either like when you're at the end or, you know, if you're putting filler over stuff, you can filler it in the gaps and all that kind of stuff. So don't worry about your imperfections. Going back to the cheap materials, filler, it is a cheap material, but it deserves its own little spot. It's fantastic, very versatile. I highly recommend it. Don't be afraid to combine different YouTube tutorials or different tutorials or different tips. Like, if you've got an idea that worked for your hills, but you've never seen anybody do it for some rocks, try it. If you've not spent that much money on it, it's definitely worth trying it. So don't be afraid to combine your ideas. And finally is that color matching, because a lot of tutorials will have very specific colors, maybe like GW or Vallejo or whatever, and it's hard to then replicate that. But color matching, really great. Also quite cheap. Oh, I never mentioned this. When you color match, you want the tester pots, not the you can buy big proper tins of it, but most of the time they'll do a tester pot to make sure that, so that it's basically so you can take this home and make sure that that color on your wall is what you wanted it to look like. So you want it to be tester pots. That's it. That video was longer than I anticipated, but I'm pretty, you know, I'm convinced the tips are worthwhile, especially if you're a beginner into terrain making as a whole. If you already make a lot of terrain, you'd be like, Jay, I already know. So because of this insane weather, I'm not sleeping very well. So I'm very, very, very tired. So we're going to call that a day. Yeah, I'm not going to ramble on any further. If you like this video, do like. If you've got any friends or your friends are making terrain for a table or the club or whatever, feel free to share the video with them. I already said like, but do like and subscribe. Hit that bell icon for notifications. Guys, please hit the bell. If you want to be notified when I actually release a video, the bell icon will get you there. Also, a couple of things that I don't normally mention. I got a Facebook group. I should post there more, but it's starting to grow. Discord, I'm always on Discord. We're either talking about Legion general stuff, or these days we're still talking about Pokemon. And Patreon, if you do like what you see, always consider like supporting us on Patreon. I was gonna say I'd highly recommend it. I mean, yeah, I highly recommend it. And why wouldn't I? Have a most beautiful day, and goodbye. Bye guys.